Well, tonight, Donald Trump chose to commemorate and memorialize slavery. Why? Because he's Donald Trump. He did that by honoring a cruel and vicious slaveholder who killed more American soldiers than anyone else in the world in history. More American soldiers than Adolf Hitler ever dreamed of killing. Donald Trump announced on social media that he has tonight, quote, reinstalled the nearly 20-foot canvas portrait of Confederate General Robert E. Lee at the West Point Library on campus. Robert E. Lee is the single most disgraced West Point graduate in history. He committed treason. He waged war against the United States of America, a war in which Robert E. Lee killed 360,000 soldiers who were defending the United States of America, while the incompetent Robert E. Lee caused the unnecessary deaths of 260,000 misguided Confederate soldiers under his command in a war that Robert E. Lee never had a chance of winning. A commemoration of treason at West Point. That's Donald Trump's idea. Memorializing treason and slavery at West Point. And that is the kind of thing that I obviously take very seriously. But it's also the kind of Trumpian madness that, thanks to the creative spark in American comedy, can be joked about at Donald Trump's expense, of course, and can be joked about brilliantly. And now there's one less comedian to make those jokes at Donald Trump's expense. And television, as you may have noticed, takes nothing more seriously than television. Television has devoted more coverage to Jimmy Kimmel losing his job than it has devoted to Donald Trump and Elon Musk literally taking food away from starving children in Africa in the middle of a famine this year. What Donald Trump and Elon Musk, when they closed down the United States Agency for International Development and its delivery of food aid in famine, they sentenced hundreds of thousands of people to death, babies, toddlers, grandfathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, starving to death together. And none of them got the attention or the outrage that we have seen on television over one person losing a TV show. Jimmy Kimmel is great at what he does. Jimmy Kimmel's writers are great. Jimmy Kimmel is a great guy. I really like Jimmy Kimmel. I really admire Jimmy Kimmel. And I am sure that as outraged as Jimmy Kimmel deserves to be about what has happened to him, I am sure that he is embarrassed to be getting more attention on television to his plight than the people in this country who have lost their health insurance because of Donald Trump. And to the dedicated federal workers in this country, many of them who have been working to save lives longer than Jimmy Kimmel has been telling jokes, who have been fired by Donald Trump. But television cares more about television than everything else in this world, as television is making very obvious to you in the last 2 days. And if you greet what happened to Jimmy Kimmel with surprise, you are unconsciously ignoring a body of knowledge that is as old as television itself, and that is the history of American corporate bravery. That book hasn't been written because there is no history of American corporate bravery. And so the blacklist is back. And don't ever forget, Hollywood invented the blacklist, a list of people who they would not employ in show business because they were suspected of having political beliefs that right-wing Republicans in Washington did not like in the 1950s. And Hollywood will likely be just as courageous this time, which is to say not courageous at all. The liberal writers, producers, directors, and actors and production crews who supply ABC's best shows will continue to do so, most likely, and take their paychecks from ABC. It has been 24 hours, And there has not been a single principled resignation from the corporate offices of ABC or Disney. Not one. And you should not expect one, because that's the way corporations behave. And I do not mean to minimize the grotesquerie of what has happened to Jimmy Kimmel. But we shouldn't exaggerate it either. Jimmy Kimmel's First Amendment rights have not been taken away. He can say whatever he wants. But no one has a constitutional right to a TV show. We can all lose our TV shows at any moment for any reason, and we're all supposed to know that. If you're in the TV business and you don't know that, well, you should know it now. The CDC director, who Robert Kennedy fired, testified to the Senate yesterday that children are dying and will die in this country because of the decisions and announcements about vaccines made by the most vile Nepo baby in American history, Robert Kennedy Jr. And that news had to fight for a sliver of space on television with the coverage of what happened to Jimmy Kimmel, who has had a spectacularly long and successful run on television and will surely provide us with more great entertainment one way or another for years to come. Conan O'Brien has brilliantly demonstrated that there is creative life after you leave the talk show anchor desk. Donald Trump is thrilled that television has decided to devote itself to what has turned out to be his successful attack on Jimmy Kimmel, Donald Trump's successful campaign to get Jimmy Kimmel off television. Donald Trump loves this coverage. Donald Trump's supporters are thrilled with this as a Donald Trump win, and they are thrilled by all the outrage expressed on television against Donald Trump for knocking Jimmy Kimmel off TV. They see this wall-to-wall coverage as a Trump win. No matter how much negative stuff gets said about Donald Trump and his FCC commissioner, it plays to Trump fans as a big Trump win. And for Donald Trump, most importantly, it creates what he needs: a giant television diversion from the giant problem of Donald Trump's year this year, which, thanks to British reporter Beth Rigby of Sky News, was thrown in Donald Trump's face again today.
Finally, if I may, the elephant in the room, Lord Mandelson, he is no longer the ambassador. Do you have some sympathy with him that he lost his job over historic links to Jeffrey Epstein? Thank you very much, sir.
I don't know him, actually. I had heard that, and I think maybe the Prime Minister would be better speaking of that. That was a choice that he made, and I don't know. What is your answer to that?
Well, I mean, it's very straightforward. Some information came to light last week which wasn't available when he was appointed, and I made a decision about it, and that's very clear.
So there's the British Prime Minister saying he couldn't possibly continue to associate with someone who was friends with Jeffrey Epstein, and that is why he fired the British ambassador to the United States last week, when Bloomberg News exclusively reported emails from Ambassador Peter Mandelson in 2008, when he was not the ambassador, to Jeffrey Epstein, after Jeffrey Epstein pled guilty and was about to begin serving a light sentence in Florida in a plea deal that saved him from facing federal sex trafficking charges and charges of raping children. And as we reported to you last night, Peter Mandelson emailed this to Jeffrey Epstein the day before Epstein started his sentence in that case, a sentence that allowed him to work all day in his office in Florida and then spend the night in a barracks-like facility that could hardly be called a prison. Mandelson emailed Jeffrey Epstein this: "I think the world of you, and I feel hopeless and furious about what has happened. I can still barely understand it. It just could not happen in Britain." Peter Mandelson has no doubt felt hopeless and furious for a week now, since Bloomberg News reported his intense sympathies for the sex trafficker and raper of children who was, according to Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years. Jeffrey Epstein said on tape, "I was Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years. But Donald Trump gets to stand beside that same British Prime Minister today who fired Peter Mandelson last week, fired him for being a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. That is what the British ambassador to the United States was convicted of in the British Court of Politics by the Prime Minister last week, being a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. And that same smarmy, pathetic British Prime Minister relentlessly sucks up to Donald Trump because he fears Donald Trump's wielding his illegal and unconstitutional tariffs in a way that will harm British exporters. If British Prime Minister Keir Starmer were running ABC, he would have fired Jimmy Kimmel a long time ago. He has the soul of a corporate CEO, which is to say, none at all. And that is what allows him to shame Britain by standing beside Jeffrey Epstein's closest friend of 10 years today. And of course, Donald Trump lied when asked about the British ambassador who got fired for his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Donald Trump was asked brilliantly by Beth Rigby, do you have some sympathy with him that he lost his job over historic links to Jeffrey Epstein? Historic links that are weaker than Donald Trump's historic links to Jeffrey Epstein. And Donald Trump didn't say yes or no. Donald Trump didn't say that he doesn't have sympathy for him. So we can assume that maybe he does have sympathy for a guy losing his job because he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. But Donald Trump also told the lie, quote, I don't know him actually. Here's Donald Trump not knowing him.
Today, it just, in my view, as the Prime Minister has said, just shows what two countries who trust each other, who are confident in each other and are familiar with each other can do, not just for ourselves, but for the rest of the world who need to benefit from a bigger and better international trading system.
Thank you very much. It was beautifully stated. What a beautiful accent, too. I'd like to have that accent. Thank you.
My mother would be proud.
Thank you very much.
Donald Trump's Scotland-born immigrant mother would not be proud of his Queen's accent, picked up in his neighborhood in New York. So there's the British ambassador in the Oval Office with Donald Trump, joking and laughing, and that wasn't the only time. That was 4 months ago. But to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt here in his 79-year-old weakening neurological state, his ability to remember how many times he's been hanging with the British ambassador in the Oval Office might be a little shaky at this point. But the British ambassador was most recently in the office on September 9th, 9 days ago. But Donald Trump's answer today was, I don't know him, actually. Donald Trump's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein is now haunting him from more than one side of our politics. Today, it was Trump supporter Joe Rogan's turn. Joe Rogan's a comedian, not a reporter, so you'll have to forgive him for being more than a week behind the news about the public release of the drawing and birthday message to Jeffrey Epstein with Donald Trump's signature that was given to Jeffrey Epstein for his 50th birthday. Joe Rogan caught up with that news today.
Yeah, it's very odd stuff.
It's quite strange.
But it's also like the way, like, enigmas never age. Have you noticed that? And Jeffrey, as a matter of fact, it was clear to me the last time I saw you. Like, if one of my friends sent me that, I'd be like, I'm getting a new number.
Yeah, yeah, you need help.
New number.
Why didn't you just write happy birthday?
Yeah, what the is wrong with you, Enigma?
And today, by far, the most important thing said about the Epstein files and Donald Trump's FBI director's testimony this week about the Epstein files came from the women, survivors of the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and his criminal co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell. Their statement should be heard in full. In a written statement, the survivors said they were shocked by Kashyap Patel's testimony, claiming falsely that there is no evidence that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked children and teenage girls to other people. The survivors' statement said, "We are struggling to understand what this means. Even the limited information that has been made public includes accounts such as Virginia Giuffre's report that Epstein trafficked her to other individuals besides himself. We also understand, as Representative Thomas Massie pointed out during the House oversight hearing, that there are FBI reports documenting witness interviews in which victims of Epstein and Maxwell named at least 20 other men they were trafficked to. Director Patel's testimony raises more questions than answers. For years, he has railed about the incompleteness of previous investigations. He is right about that. Previous investigations were indeed incomplete. So what is his plan to make sure that a thorough and unbiased investigation is conducted at last? He seems to acknowledge that the FBI FD 302 reports naming other men to whom Epstein, Maxwell victims were trafficked are real. So will he release those reports to the House Oversight Committee and to the public? He seems to imply that officials in previous administrations deemed those reports not to be credible. He has not read the reports himself. He has not spoken to the victims himself. And yet he plans to defer to unnamed officials from prior administrations who treated the reports as not credible. How can this be? Those previous administrations are the ones that Kash Patel spent years accusing of a cover-up. Now, he will pass the buck to them to decide that information about other men in the Epstein-Maxwell trafficking ring is not even worth following up on? There are victims and witnesses who, to this day, have still not been interviewed. Will they continue to be ignored? Survivors deserve better, and so does the public. We deserve answers to questions like these. Do the FBI and Justice Department have a plan to conduct a proper investigation at last? What is that plan? Will you release the FD 302 forms containing witness accounts of men to whom Epstein and Maxwell trafficked women and girls? Who were the officials in previous administrations who deemed the FD 302 reports not credible? Why are you deferring to that decision without reading the reports or interviewing the witnesses yourself? Given the number of times that survivors of Epstein-Maxwell abuse have been betrayed by the justice system, how will you ensure an unbiased and truth-seeking process that survivors can trust? Director Patel testified that the original sin of the Epstein case was the unconscionable non-prosecution deal that U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta gave Epstein and the limited investigation Acosta conducted. As head of the FBI, Director Patel can work now to remedy that in a way that finally centers survivor voices and finally pursues the whole truth. The public demands it, the victims deserve it, and our system of justice, without fear or favor, requires it. Survivors are waiting. Survivors are waiting.